Have you ever looked at a relationship from the outside and just wondered, why do they stay? It seems so obvious that it's causing them pain. Well, today we're going to get into that. We're going to break down the powerful psychological architecture that can trap someone in a toxic relationship. You'll see how what looks like a simple choice from the outside is actually a complex psychological prison on the inside. Okay, let's dive in. So here's our roadmap. We're going to start with the psychological prison itself. Then we'll get into the gambling mechanism that powers the whole thing, see how it's used, and understand the toxic bond it creates. We'll explore exactly why leaving is so incredibly hard. And most importantly, we'll look at how to recognize this and break the cycle for good. All right, first up, the psychological prison. We're kicking things off with this central paradox, this big question. How can a relationship that causes so much pain be one of the hardest ones to ever leave? The answer, as you'll see, has very little to do with simple choice and everything to do with a complex psychological trap we're about to unpack. This is really the heart of the matter, isn't it? The reason it's so tough isn't about a lack of willpower or strength. Not at all. It's about a powerful, insidious form of emotional conditioning that's designed, whether the abuser knows it or not, to create a deep, profound dependency. Now, to really get this, you have to separate two key things: the action and the result. The abuser's behavior, that's the pattern. It's what they do. The internal effect this has on the victim, well, that's the creation of an incredibly powerful but dysfunctional bond. And that bond has a name. It's called a trauma bond. Think of it as this profound, gut-level attachment to the person who is harming you. The victim can be completely aware of the damage being done, but they still feel this deep connection, this dependency. It's a devastating paradox. Sometimes, the more they suffer, the tighter the bond becomes. Okay, so that immediately raises the question, how on earth is a bond like that even created? Well, the engine behind it is a really well-documented psychological principle, and it has its roots deep in the science of addiction. This is the absolute key to the whole thing. It's called intermittent reinforcement. It's the constant, unpredictable switching between good and bad. One moment you get affection, praise, love. The next, you get cruelty, silence, and indifference. You never ever know what's coming next, and that unpredictability, that's precisely what makes it so addictive. And hey, this isn't just some pop psychology term. This goes way back to foundational research by the famous psychologist B.F. Skinner. He's the one who discovered that if you give a reward unpredictably, the behavior to get that reward becomes way more persistent and much, much harder to stop than if you just gave the reward consistently. You know, the best analogy for this is gambling. Seriously, think about someone at a slot machine. They pull the lever again and again, enduring loss after loss, completely hooked by the hope of that one unpredictable win. In an abusive relationship, the dynamic is exactly the same. Those rare, random moments of affection, they become emotional jackpots that keep the victim pulling the lever, hoping for the next good moment, no matter how much they're losing. So how does this intermittent reinforcement actually get delivered in a relationship? Well, it's often done through a specific tactic, one that uses what you could call emotional crumbs. And that tactic is known as breadcrumbing. It's the calculated act of giving just enough affection, a tiny little bit, to keep someone hooked, but never ever enough to be fulfilling. It's like feeding a few crumbs to someone who's starving. It doesn't actually nourish them. It just creates dependency and a desperate hope for a real meal that's never going to come. And here's what this looks like in the real world. It's that one random loving text you get after days of the silent treatment. It's that single, isolated compliment that's buried under a mountain of criticism. It's the sudden, beautiful promises about the future that come right after a terrible fight. Or, and this is a classic, it's that small, tender gesture that happens the very moment you're finally packing your bags. Every single one is a crumb designed to reset your hope and pull you back in. And the long-term effect of living on these crumbs is just devastating. A person's self-esteem gets gradually ground down to nothing. They start to actually believe that these tiny scraps are all they're worth. They get used to the lack of consistent love and respect, and they start to feel like they have to fight and earn even the bare minimum of kindness. So, when you put all of this together, the intermittent reinforcement, the breadcrumbing, it all forges that incredibly toxic connection we talked about at the beginning, the trauma bond. This bond is built through a really predictable and really awful repeating cycle. First, you have idealization. This is the love bombing phase where everything is perfect. And this part is crucial because it sets this euphoric baseline that the victim will then spend the rest of the relationship desperately trying to get back to. Then comes devaluation. Criticism, cruelty, sarcasm start to creep in. Then, just when hope is lost, you get the intermittent reward, that little crumb of affection that reignites everything. And then, the cycle repeats, and with every single rotation, that bond just gets stronger and harder to escape. And this right here is maybe the most important thing to understand. A victim's inability to just leave is not a sign of weakness. It is not a lack of intelligence. It is the direct, predictable result of intense emotional conditioning. Their brain is reacting exactly the way a brain conditioned by intermittent reinforcement is designed to react. You know, when you put it side by side with healthy love, the difference is just night and day. Healthy love is built on consistency, respect, and empathy. A trauma bond is fueled by volatility, fear, and illusion. What keeps a person trapped isn't the reality of the relationship, but the desperate, fading hope of returning to that perfect, idealized beginning. Now, let's go even deeper. Let's look at what is physically happening inside the brain during all of this. Why is this cycle so powerful on a biological, neurological level? Your brain is basically on a biochemical roller coaster from hell. The moments of cruelty and stress, they flood your system with the stress hormone cortisol. Then that little crumb of affection, that unpredictable reward, triggers an intense spike of dopamine, the reward chemical. This cycle of extreme highs and extreme lows is chemically addictive. It literally forges a dependency in the brain that is unbelievably difficult to break. And beyond the brain chemistry, there are other factors that systematically build the walls of this prison even higher. Abusers will often isolate their victims, cutting them off from friends and family, their support system. We already talked about how self-esteem gets eroded, making the victim feel unworthy of anything better. There can also be financial or practical dependency. And maybe the most powerful factor of all is just clinging to that hope of redemption. The belief that if I just try harder, I can fix them, I can save this. But here's the good news. This prison, it can be dismantled. Understanding how it's built is the very first step toward finding the way out. So now, let's talk about the path to freedom. The framework for breaking free really has 3 core steps. First is to understand. You have to consciously relabel what's happening. This isn't love, it's conditioning. Second, and this is so often essential, is to cut contact. Going no contact is what breaks that biochemical and psychological cycle of reinforcement. And finally, rebuild. Reconnect with the people you were isolated from. Find your support network and seek professional help to process the trauma and get your sense of self back. So ultimately, the big takeaway is this. What we think of as love can be twisted and distorted into a tool for control. And just recognizing that this dynamic is real, that this distortion is even possible, that is the most powerful and decisive step anyone can take, whether it's for yourself or to help someone you care about. And that leaves us with one final question to really think about. In our culture, we tend to romanticize emotional intensity, don't we? The drama, the passion. But how often are we mistaking what is actually dangerous instability for passionate intensity? Learning to spot that difference, that is the key to protecting ourselves and building relationships that are genuinely healthy.